Well, it's so nice to have you here. In case you don't know, my name is Daniela Costa. I'm part of the audiovisual division of the American Translators Association. We are here to talk about some interesting things that we are so passionate about as regard to visual translation mostly, but also about accessibility, which is the topic today, and some other things that may be related to our field. Today we are going to interview Pablo Romero Fresco. He's a rock star in this field of accessibility, and Respeaking will ask him everything we want to know about this. So if you have any questions, you can write them here I think that there is a box or something to write questions or to make comments. If I can, I will try to read them while we are doing the interview without interrupting our guest, of course.
Hello. How are you?
How are you? Good, good. All very good. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yes, it's perfect. For me, it's
Brilliant.
perfect. I think, yes, everything's fine. So, how are you, Pablo? Tell us.
Very good. Thank you.
What are
very
you?
Good. Oh, I'm not using earphones. Shall I get them? I've got them here.
As you wish. If you can hear me well, we can do it without headphones.
It's
up to you.
Perfectly.
Okay, that's great. Well, can you tell us a little bit about I was going to introduce you, but it's better if you tell us what you do, because it's really interesting. So
okay,
you will say it better than me.
That's okay. So my name is Pablo Romero Fresco, and I'm Spanish. I used to work at the University of Roehampton in London, where I was there for 9 years, and I was teaching media accessibility and audiovisual translation and doing research on that as well. And 2 years ago, I moved back to Spain, to my home country and to my home university, the Universidade de Vigo, University of Vigo, in the northwest of Spain, in Galicia. I set up a research center called GALMA, and we do research on different areas to do with media accessibility, but I think probably now 3 main lines, which are, one is live subtitling or live captioning, intra and interlingual. The other one would be accessible filmmaking, which we can talk about today, and the other one is creative media accessibility, or creative audio description, which we've been working on for the past years. So that's another one. But
that's something new. I mean, the creative subtitles. I mean, it's work in progress, I think.
It's work in progress, and it's I think it's creative, not just subtitles, but also creative audiovisual translation in general, or media accessibility in general, and it's a result of the accessible filmmaking work, because by working with filmmakers, they end up kind of demanding to go beyond the guidelines. You know what I mean? So it's part of it's part of where the accessible filmmaking model is taken us, if you like.
Okay, so we can start from the very beginning. What is Respeaking? Because we hear it a lot, but we don't know maybe what it is. What is Respeaking?
Sure. So Respeaking is a method to produce live subtitles or live captions. I don't know if we are speaking to an American audience or a European one or worldwide, but and we don't know, right? So live captions or live subtitles could be produced through different methods. I think the most common ones at the moment are steno, with stenography, but let's just say that it's very difficult to train people. So it used to be prevailing all over the world, in many countries at least, and now it's little by little, Respeaking is taken over. So Respeaking is another method, which in the US is called voice writing, and it consists of live captions where you have a human who's a voice writer or a respeaker who listens to the original live TV program, for example. And if they listen to something like "Welcome to the BBC News at 6," then you would repeat that, saying "Welcome to the BBC News at 6, full stop." And that will be, you say that to a speech recognition software, and the software displays it as subtitles on the screen. So you re-speak as you listen, you add punctuation marks, and you add certain elements that are needed for those captions to be valid for deaf and hard of hearing people, like you identify the speakers and those issues. So it's a form of intralingual or same language simultaneous interpreting plus punctuation marks, where you work alongside your partner, which is a speech recognition software. That's Respeaking. And I guess the third method that is nowadays being used is no human. So fully automatic live captions, which we can talk about as well. So part of the work that we do is to assess the quality of the different methods to ensure that if live captions are going to be used automatically, then we need to ensure that the quality is high enough and as good at least as the human-made ones, right? So that's, but Respeaking is this human. It could be used for TV, but it could also be used for live events or meetings or classes. So in the States, when it's not used for TV, it's called CART, C-A-R-T. And in Europe, it's just called live subtitles for live events or for educational purposes. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, but it's so hard. I tried it once for an exercise in a course. I'm taking a master's course, and I hated it because it was my lowest grade of all my assignments. I mean, I found it so at ISTRA, at University of Cádiz, Universidade de Cádiz, actually. And I mean, I used a free software, I mean, open source. I didn't use Dragon, which is much better, I know. But it was so hard. I mean, I was so discouraged after I finished because I have some interpreter training. I mean, I'm not working as an interpreter now. I'm mostly a subtitler. But after that, I realized how hard it is and how trained you have to be to produce something of a good quality, because people will need to read what you are saying, and it should be coherent, and the punctuation should be okay. I mean, it's really, really, really hard.
Yeah, I think the name doesn't do it justice, because all this business about Respeaking, it looks like you're parroting, you're just repeating, but it's far from that, because first you have to split your attention between what you're listening to and what you're saying. Then you have to re-speak in a way that, or speak in a way that the machine understands, that the software understands, which is not exactly the way you would normally speak. And you also have to think about whether the software will understand that, because if you say there was an accident, comma, but only 2 people are badly injured and one of them is in a coma. Now, how does the software know if one comma is going to be a word and the other one is going to be a command that is actually a punctuation mark? So you need to be thinking about the fact that the work doesn't end when you speak, but rather is going to be picked up by the software, and that's the next step. So part of your mind is thinking, this is what I'm listening to. Another part is thinking, can I say this like this, or do I have to rephrase it? Because sometimes the speaker is too fast and you can't speak that fast. So you have to rephrase and summarize a little bit. And then how am I dictating? How am I intonating? So the software gets it right. And one more step as well, which is, once I've done all this, my job is not finished, because my subtitle will be displayed on the screen and it may have errors as well. So what do I do with those errors? I could try and correct them, but then I may lose the thread because I'm trying to follow the speaker, or I leave them there. Or in some countries, for example, they don't want to have those errors there. So you respeak, you validate, or you look at what you've done, you correct it, and then you release it, you launch it, you cue it in for the viewers to see. Of course, you reduce the errors, but you increase the delay. So Respeaking and live captions are any form of live captioning, Respeaking being one of them, is always going to have some errors and some delay. And depending on how you choose to deal with those, which one you choose to fix, the other one will increase. So if you don't want your errors to be there, then you correct them, but you increase your delay. If you want to minimize the delay of your captions, you just launch them straight away. But that means that it will have some errors. So it's what we call a short blanket. You can cover your head or your feet, but not both at the same time. So it's very tricky, it's challenging. And as you said, interpreters are good at it, but not only. At least re-speaking without a change of language, because we're only talking about same language re-speaking so far, right? We have trained subtitlers. We know that musicians have been good at it as well. So you don't have to be an interpreter, although having interpreting skills helps a lot.
Well, that's so interesting.
You need to stop, because otherwise I'll go on and on. Huh?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. That's great. Because you make it much easier for me, but and for everybody, because you're so clear when you explain and you make it sound easy. I mean, it's challenging, but at the same time, you say, well, you have to split your attention. That it's really hard. Are there any techniques you can use? I mean, how can you if you want to practice at home? I mean, you want to start, and before taking a course, you say, okay, I will do something. What can you do in that case?
I would recommend, okay, so re-speaking is made up of three elements, I think, in terms of training. I would say it's a combination of the process is a process of interpreting, right? In the same language, albeit, but interpreting. So interpreting skills are needed. Subtitling skills, because what you're producing are subtitles. And then speech recognition. So if we kind of put those elements apart, bring them apart, then that's the different things that you could be doing. So what I would start with always is with the dictation thing, the dictation element. So start with your speech recognition software. You're not listening and speaking, you're only speaking to it. Because eventually what you want to do is you want to listen, you want to speak with punctuation marks, you want to listen to yourself and control your voice, you want to look at what's out there, what you're producing, and you want to correct it. But that's just the real final stage. So before we get to that, I will deconstruct it and start with, at the beginning, not even listening, just talk to the computer. And when you create your voice profile, almost like your user profile for the speech recognizer, work for a week or 2 or 3 or for a month on, I know exactly how I need to talk to the speech recognizer so that it gets it right. And when you control that, and when you are able even to increase your speed as you speak, then you know what your perfect kind of speech patterns are for the software. And then that's when we start working with the students on, okay, now that you've got that, now start listening and re-speaking. That's when the interpreting process begins. But at least you know how you speak to the software. Otherwise, when you're listening and speaking, you just don't control your voice. You speak naturally, spontaneous. It doesn't work. You know, and
that's what happened to me.
Yeah, often what we do is we work with those students until they get the perfect dictation mode. Then we say, okay, let's interpret now. So they start listening and speaking, and you know what they do? They close their eyes, they go like this, and they forget everything they've done for the past 3 weeks. And they start speaking fast and no punctuation marks, everything down the drain. So we have to get it back slowly and say, remember how we, okay, so and then little by little you start doing it again. And you recover that dictation mode that you had. And it's only normal because when you're dictating, only dictating, 100% of your mind, unless you're thinking of a shopping list, 100% of your mind is on how I dictate. But when you start listening and speaking, then half of your mind is on what you're listening to. So obviously half of the attention now is devoted to speaking, and you lose it. So you have to make sure that you can perform as well as you were performing when you were dictating, but now that you're actually devoting half of the attention to it. So little by little, and once you get that, which is now I'm listening and speaking and it works, then you start looking at the screen and acting upon it. You know, you're saying, okay, now I can actually look at the screen and see what's coming up. I can think about it as I speak, and I can maybe correct it. You know, that's the final stage. Little by little, but it's by no means impossible. By no means impossible. A lot of people are doing it, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, if you have the skills and if you get to it, I mean, it's practice like everything. Yes. I mean, it's the same with interpreting or even with subtitling. I mean, you'll get faster and more productive and more creative in a way that at the beginning that you were following like word by word or or maybe dubbing. I mean, it's a process. But
it's a good point because it's a good point because I mean, we always say that re-speaking is to subtitling what interpreting is to translation. That is, you go from the written to the oral, and you go from the having some time to work on it to working live. So I think the important element there is, are you okay with, are you comfortable working live? Are you comfortable working with, dealing with issues as they occur, with no time to kind of, you could prepare a little bit, but working live? Mm-hmm. And are you comfortable working with your voice? So those are the two questions that you need to ask. And if the person is comfortable with that, then go for it. But we know that sometimes when you train students on translation and interpreting, some of them say, interpreting is not for me. So if, I mean, interpreting adds the language issue, of course, but if working live and working with your voice is not for you, then you're not. But one kind of little nuance, which is a lot of people use re-speaking even if they're not working live, So they're, for example, working with texts or they're translating a documentary, and then because you're actually talking to the computer, your translation is speaking it to the computer, not necessarily live, but you make up for, I mean, you're more efficient because you can speak faster than you can type. So a lot of people are doing that as well. So using re-speaking for non-live content. So they will be hearing a narration, listening to the narration of documentary, and either you speak as you hear, or you even pause the narration and then speak. It's a way of, I think we've done some experiments, and I remember that, I don't know, I think it was maybe 20%, 30% faster. So, in the long run, it helps.
Well, yeah, of course it helps, especially when you work with tight deadlines, as we usually do. So, and how did you start working on these topics? I mean, on accessibility, re-speaking.
It was long ago. Yeah, I'm reading some questions here. I would like to know more about formal training. Right.
Training. Any courses? Yeah.
Formal
you
training,
have a course.
So, okay. There is, I mean, we're still talking about intralingual re-speaking, same language, yeah? I should say that there is also now a new kind of variation of it, which is interlingual, or, I mean, because it's basically going from one language into another. Yeah, you listen to one language, re-speak into another. We'll talk about it, but basically it's a big boom of this now at the moment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because there's so much need for translation of any kind of online content, live content, like this talk, for example, business meetings, live events like conferences, where people need to be attending that into one language that is not theirs, and they want to be reading the subtitles. You could potentially offer interpreting, but a lot of people don't want to be listening to both things at the same time. They just want to be reading the subtitles. So we are now training people to do what we used to call interlingual re-speaking. Some people call it trans-speaking, but other people say, it's not about speaking, it really is interpreting. So I think the most kind of common name these days is speech-to-text interpreting, speech-to-text interpreting. So you could do it, again, with different methods. Some people listen and type. But with re-speaking, it's easier. So basically, you listen to a talk in English, and then you re-speak it into Spanish. So you'll have your subtitles into Spanish for life. And this is fantastic because it brings together accessibility and translation. It merges them, right? So you would have deaf people sitting alongside hearing people needing the same subtitles to access. So it's access for all in a way of, and it brings together those worlds of translation and accessibility. So back to the question, formal training. Okay, so there are some universities which are training re-speaking. So you have Roehampton training in English into English, with some practicing of the languages. You have the University of Antwerp in Belgium teaching Dutch into Dutch and also English into Dutch. Warsaw, Polish into Polish, but also interlingual now. Vienna as well, you can find there. And in Spain, we have the University of Vigo, my university, where we have an online course. And this online course is the first online course on intra and interlingual respeaking, English, Spanish, English. So you basically come out being able to respeak same language in those languages or into the other language. Yeah. What we do for training is we include 3 modules. One is on interpreting, simultaneous interpreting. Another one is on intralingual respeaking. And once you put those 2 together, the final module is on interlingual respeaking or speech-to-text interpreting. So, you know, you put together all those skills. And it's interesting because some people come from the interpreting world and they really have to get along well with the speech recognizer. That's their job. Whereas others come from maybe subtitling or intralingual respeaking, and suddenly they have to now include the translation element, the live translation element. So they come from different pathways and they need to arrive to the same end. So answering that question, that's the formal training we have. You have informal training in the results of a EU-funded, European Union-funded project that we just finished. The first one on interlingual respeaking, which is the ILSA, ILSA project. You'll find it on the...
I heard about that.
Yeah, and that one, one of the outcomes of the project was to put together the first free online training course on interlingual respeaking. So it's not tutored, but you have all the modules and the units. And if you want to know what's about, you can actually access it and you know, like almost like self-taught. I would recommend going to a taught course, but if there's no possibility, then the materials there can be used for that. So they're useful.
Wow, it's great, and it's great to hear that there's a course in Spain where we in the southern hemisphere in Latin American countries we can access that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you work with Castilian Spanish or neutral or whatever.
It doesn't make a difference, and the software that we use, you can choose the type of Spanish or English that you want when you're speaking. So the software will expect you, depending on what you select, to speak one type or another type of Spanish. In the same way that when you speak in English, you make a difference in the software in Dragon, whether you want to kind of adapt it to American or British English or Indian English, because it will expect a different type of pronunciation. So it works in that way. Yeah, and now we have a lot of demand, a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from companies all over the world who need those kind of, you know, that kind of service. And it's interesting because a lot of our trainees are now working in like crazy hours. They're really working crazy hours because sometimes you will get an email from Australia saying there is this talk in Spanish, we need live translation to English. And the companies don't know exactly. You see, they have a need, which is, I know I have this event, and I know I've been asked to provide live translation via subtitles, but they don't even know what to call it. So I've heard bilingual captions, bilingual live captioning. There's this company which keeps calling it live transcription into another language. And I keep telling them, it's way more difficult than, you know, as in, please pay properly, you know, pay the complexity of the job. Because quite frankly, after finishing the project with some interpreting colleagues, we all agreed that it was one step beyond interpreting in terms of complexity, which means that we are fighting hard for the rates to be higher than those of interpreting. And we're getting it. So at the moment it's working. So it's really well paid because it's complex. And we're pushing for working conditions that are according to the complexity. So we recommend 2 people for a job. So for an hour job, hour and a half, we have 2 people, 20 minutes each, and they even correct each other's mistakes. So that's what we're recommending. At the moment, the companies are happy with that because what they get is fantastic. The fact that you can suddenly get live translated subtitles, that means that at the end of the day, you can produce a video with those. You can have a written translation of what happened in the conference or in the talk. And that's priceless because with interpreting, you couldn't do that. You have an audio and you have to transcribe, but now you have it.
So you leave us subtitlers out of work so we have to.
Oh, well,
I'm
actually,
joking.
no, you know what?
But I will try this because I'm fascinated by the fact of
Yeah.
how it sounds. I now realize that the way I approached my task was wrong, because I should have trained the software with my voice and be more comfortable with that. And after that, I started like re-speaking, as you said. And I did it like 5 times, 10 times, and the result was dreadful. Again, dreadful all the time, because you have to get used to tell you have to think like the machine. So you have to tell the machine, okay, stop, or comma, or whatever, or question mark, opening question mark, closing question mark in Spanish. So it's really, really hard. But it's as you said, you have to develop a certain set of skills, and then after that it's not impossible, of course.
Definitely,
But
yes.
it's great. It's great.
Well,
It's great
at
because
the
it
moment,
combines.
yeah, at the moment, what there is there's a lack of awareness in the companies, because they know what they need, but they don't know what method they can use for it. Many of them don't know that there is such a method as interlingual respeaking, so they're using more complex methods. For example, a lot of them are using a simultaneous interpreter. Imagine that you want to translate this talk live, right? So what they do is they would have a simultaneous interpreter who is picking up my audio and turning it into Spanish audio, speech, and then they would have a Spanish to Spanish respeaker who picks up the Spanish translation audio and respeaks it into Spanish subtitles, which means that you have 2 people, probably twice as likely to have errors, but especially with delay. And what we tell them is, well, this could be done with 1 person that we're training, but they don't know exactly that this exists. And then there are different ways of automatizing this. So in some cases they're using automatic speech recognition to turn my English into written English, and then for example re-speaker to go from that, or even automatic speech recognition plus machine translation. So you can there are 5 or 6 different methods with different degrees of automation, and they choose. But obviously at the moment, we're still doing research on that, comparing the methods. We are presenting this research in September in a conference in Barcelona, where we are testing English, Spanish with all those methods, and in Italian as well, Alice Pagano. But to me, it looks like interlingual respeaking, if done properly, is probably the best, because it reduces delay, and if done in pairs, it works really well. So that's my thinking. There's a question there, which is, in respeaking, how are the in and out cues managed? Human manual input or by the machine? Well, I simplified the process a little bit, because when you speak into the speech recognition software, that software is integrated into a subtitling software. So it is the subtitling software that displays the subtitles on the TV screen or whatever screen you're using. So that subtitling software doesn't do the recognition, but it does the formatting. So it can help reduce the number of characters per line and that kind of thing. So the formatting could be dealt with by the subtitling software. But in terms of when you cue out your subtitle, you can do it yourself, and you can choose whether you wait, you look, you correct, and you cue, or you cue out and then hope for the best and correct if you need to.
Wow, that's awesome. I have to try, because that's one of the it's in my I don't know, it's my bucket list, but it's something I have to do. I have to learn how to use the speech recognition software, because my hands are hurting after 20-something years. So it's my next step, I think, in my career. So you use Dragon for this. Is it the only software, or are there any others?
Dragon. We use Dragon because at the moment is probably the best for human mediated. That is, there's other types of software for automatic, where for example, if we were having a Zoom call at the moment, Zoom has a very good automatic. It's hard for us, but I think it's best to know that this exists, which is they have a very good auto captioning service. So
Yeah.
when I have, for example, I don't know, a meeting with a deaf person, and I have no chance of having a re-speaker, then I use Zoom, and Zoom has very good automatic subtitles. Now, they have errors, they have mistakes, and you have no control over that. So the other day I was having a conversation with a deaf artist I'm collaborating with, and it was good. It was, I think, probably 95 is too much, 85% accuracy, but you are reading your own captions and you're thinking, oh, that is wrong, and you have no option because you say it again and it's going to be wrong again. So it's a bit tricky, but it exists. But for re-speaking, we normally use Dragon. So you can buy a license, I don't know, in the region of €300, $300. That's at the moment what we have. And then for automatic subtitling, people use other types of software. But for re-speaking, that's the one that I think is the most common one at the moment. And it has Spanish, English, Italian, German, French, Dutch, Chinese, and or Japanese too, I think. That's roughly what it is, I think, at the moment.
And have you seen the live captioning in YouTube?
Yes, I have. I have. Well, that's a tricky one because you see the thing with, you're talking about automatic captioning, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
The,
yes, automatic captioning.
It could go anywhere, because the problem with that is that when you're dealing with really fully automatic, what you need is the right conditions. I mean, someone who doesn't hesitate too much, someone who doesn't sound too spontaneous, where there is no background sound, you know what I mean? Background noise, sorry. So it really is hard. I know that at the moment, kind of the state of the art at the moment on TV is that in many countries, broadcasters are beginning to test automatic captions for their news. And they've gone about it in two ways. Some of them are saying, let's test what we have, compare it to our human-made, and let's decide. And others are saying, let's put them out, and then let's test. So in the States, for example, they're putting them out. In some particular kind of regions, states, yesterday I heard that there was the first nationwide broadcaster trying them out, but there's loads of complaints because, well, they're not as good, obviously. They're nowhere near as good, and they work for some programs but not for others. And also, if there's a big error, there's no human to correct it. So it's out there. And remember, speech recognition errors are tricky because a speech recognizer will always come up with a real word. It will never give you a non-existent word because it can only give you the words that it has. It won't give you, for example, spelling mistakes normally because it doesn't have spelling mistakes. It has a vocabulary, it has a dictionary. The problem is that it may come up with a word that sounds the same as the one that has been said, but that is completely different and means something different. So expect nonsense very often, or a real word but that makes no sense there in the context. Expect different meanings, expect a lot of things, you know. So we re-speakers are kind of alert and we say, oh, I should correct that or I shouldn't. I mean, the example is always the same. At the very beginning of the tests done by the BBC, the Queen commemorates her birthday on her own, was said. The re-speaker said that. What came out was the Queen commemorates her birthday on heroin. So big thing in the UK, well, big thing anywhere, but big thing in the UK, the Queen, well, you know. So what do you do? You know, you get fired, I guess. You get a phone call, you know.
It sounds like Monty Python or something. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, really, I mean,
oh my God. We laugh, but people shouldn't.
I know.
Maybe they panicked a little bit, yes, and the British are so formal that I understand.
You really don't want to do that. Not in the UK, so you don't want to do that, no. Yeah, so there you go.
That's so cool.
But the thing is, okay, I mean, that's part of the pressure, you know, because you are, somebody told me that you get instantaneous, immediate feedback. And that is true, you know, you don't always get that kind of feedback in front of you, thrown to you, you know what I mean? Because it's the screen that shows you and tells you, look at the mess you've made, you know? And you have to just keep going, you know? So it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
You have to be very strong, yeah, and not to be affected by frustration or not to get frustrated
Yeah, I
soon.
mean, to
And
be
you
honest,
have to make compromises all the time. I mean,
yeah,
even I mean, we translators make compromises, but this is a much bigger effort in a way,
yeah,
just to
because
say, okay, this is what it is.
yeah, it's live news,
I
you
will
know, it's
improve
live,
next time.
exactly. It could be live news and it could be something important, and a lot of people are kind of in a way depending on it. But I mean, I don't do it very often. I admire the people who do it. I mean, I've just seen Haley Dawson, who's there, and she's a wonderful re-speaking trainer and a wonderful re-speaker. And these guys, I mean, these people need to be cool, you know, they need to be like, yeah, be able to deal with that kind
Yeah.
of stress. But yeah, it's part of the
Yeah.
job.
Wow. Well, and now let's move on to the other topic, which is as interesting as this one,
Yeah.
which is accessible filmmaking. What is it?
Yeah.
I mean, what is
So
accessible filmmaking?
accessible filmmaking is in a way, it's a reaction. I mean, I think it comes from the fact that by looking at audiovisual translation and media accessibility a few years ago, we were thinking, okay, now that the quantity that is, it's been dealt with by legislation, that is the fact that, just going to put on the lights, if we have, yeah. Now that there is more legislation, it means that more and more countries are having more of the programs and films subtitled, for example. We need to look at the issue of quality. And of course, you can look at the guidelines, you can improve them. But for me, it's always the fact that it's happening so late that translation and media accessibility are produced at the distribution stage where you have no contact with the filmmakers. I mean, I always took it like this is the way it is. But I always thought that there was something wrong with that. And also the fact that we are so invisible in the industry as well is really annoying, because there's so much depends on us, right? And then I remember a few years ago I did an MA in filmmaking and started making films, and I thought, you know, why are we so far apart? You know, where this divorce came upon and why? Because at the beginning of kind of silent films, translation was done within the production process. So the filmmakers were aware of what was going on, and the intertitles were subtitled as part of the post-production process. But somewhere along the line, that connection was lost. When dubbing and subtitling were kind of streamlined, then they were relegated, you know? And there was a figure that always struck me as really hard, which is 50% of the revenue of most films comes from their translated and accessible versions, and yet only 0.1 to 1% is spent on translation and accessibility. So, I mean, we really got it wrong somewhere along the lines, you know? And that's what we said, okay, can we start working on a different model where when the film is being made, translation is, is considered, basically. And for that to be done, then we need to collaborate with filmmakers. So this was the idea for the model, and we've been working on it for the past 7 years or so. And things are beginning to change now, and it's really rewarding to be able to work with filmmakers, because I mean, obviously there's a long process there where you have to raise awareness, you have to talk to them, have to talk to producers as well, but it's not that difficult. And when it happens, then it's fantastic, because it becomes a different conversation. You know, there's a post-production process, for example, where a filmmaker works on the sound and the images and the editing, and then on the translation and the access, you know, and you're part of that process. So you realize that because you're earlier and talking to them first, all those questions that you used to have, like, is this what they meant? You know, that kind of thing. Now you can ask. We no longer have to guess. We no longer have to make decisions that change a great deal of the meaning of the film without us knowing whether this is what the filmmaker meant, you know? And then there's all sorts of things that we realize, or that the filmmakers realize, that unless they collaborate on that with us, the translated and accessible version may be saying something else, maybe watched so differently that it becomes a different film. I don't know if I can give you an example. The example that we normally give is loads of instances, for example, where you have a shortcut of a film, you know, a shortcut of a few frames, and you have a narration over it. And we know for a fact that if you have a subtitle over it, it's going to be very difficult to look at that image, very difficult. So because we know, because of eye tracking studies, that as soon as a subtitle is shown on the screen, then the viewer's eyes go down to those subtitles, right? Sometimes, regardless of whether you know the language, text on screen attracts a lot of attention. So when I was making my first films, I realized that I was a bit careless in that, and that, for example, I had short shots, a few seconds, where I had my speaker in this documentary narrating, and in that short shot, which I really wanted people to look at that image, then because he was narrating, then I had a subtitle for my Spanish viewers. And when I tracked the film, I realized that there were 10, 15 shots that were not, where the image was not being seen at all by my Spanish viewers. And that means, and of course the English viewers were seeing everything because they only had to see and listen to. But I was causing what I call subtitling blindness, which is by reading the subtitle, you're blind to the image, you cannot see it. So if you get a 10-minute film where 10 scenes or shots, long shots, are not being seen at all, then it's the same film, but it's being watched so differently that it almost becomes a different film. They had no recollection of those images, you know, my viewers, no recollection. So I guess my idea there would be that I may or may not want to change it, but at least if I'm a filmmaker and somebody tells me about it, then I say, oh, right, okay. So now I'm aware that there's another audience. So I'm not just making my film for the original audience, which is what filmmakers normally do, but there is a wider audience of accessible versions and translated versions. And unless I think about them and I talk to my translators about that, then I don't know how that film is going to be watched. I mean, I'm generalizing because even between you and me, we'll watch the film differently. But in general, there is no regard, no consideration by filmmakers, and I'm not blaming them. It's just the way it is, of any of the audience apart from the original audience. And what we're trying to do here is, by bringing them on board, we help them to be accessible filmmakers, which means filmmakers who start thinking about all the audiences. They could be the audiences of the English version with subtitles, or they could be the blind, partially sighted, or any audience that needs audio description. And so the interesting thing about this is that filmmakers they really become engaged with it. You know, I always get the same question, which is, what if filmmakers don't care? I honestly don't think I've met one who didn't care, because it's their films, you know? And when they realize that their films are being watched differently or not being watched, or that image on which you worked for so long, you know, with the director of photography, suddenly it's not seen, then they care. So, and they start, okay, so what can I do now? And you talk about audio description with them, and they realize that audio description means I'm going to interpret the images of your film. And I've never talked to you about it, but I'm going to describe them, you know, or captioning. I'm going to describe those sounds for the viewers. But you're thinking, okay, you know, there's music that's been imagined. There's a score, there's a soundtrack, right? And it's you can hear it in one of the scenes, and it's important. As a captioner, I have to describe the sound, right? But why should I have to come up with a description of that music, ominous or suspenseful or whatever, when once upon a time when the film was being planned, that music was not made, and probably it was the filmmaker who said, I want music that is ominous and suspenseful, and you know what I mean? The music was described first. It started with a description, it went on to become music, and then it goes back to a description. But can we not access the person who actually described it in the first place, and we agree on what that music was meant to be? Why should we be doing that in isolation over 3 days with a lot of pressure and with the loneliness of, you know, that means I'm not being part of this process, but we are part of a creative process. We just have to ensure that they know and work together, you know? So a whole different world opens up when you work with filmmakers, because it's a really rewarding process where they learn and we learn as well, you know? I can't stop talking, so you need to stop me.
No, I'm blown away. I'm speechless, because everything you say, it's just like that. I mean, we are totally isolated. Imagine I have been working as a subtitler for 20 years. I don't even know who is reviewing my work, for example, because I work for vendors and big companies. So it's incredible. I mean, you don't have any contact with other human beings unless you come up with a team, or I mean, the project managers want to do that. But otherwise, I mean, it's so lonely. But at the same time, do you see this could happen in the mainstream, like in big productions, like Marvel or whatever, just to name?
As you were saying this, I was thinking, you know, it's almost like, I'm sure that this is a very common trait of a capitalist neoliberal society, but you know, it's almost like one of those exercises where you start looking at something and you work on your little corner and you keep working on it until it looks great, and then somebody suddenly zooms out and you realize that you're part of a bigger picture. You're actually, what you thought was a circle somewhere in whatever ends up being a cog in a wheel of a massive robot, but you're not aware of it. And I think that's what we are working on a little corner. We may actually then go to cinema and watch the film, but you know, from this to actually watching it, there's a lot of things. You know, we're part of something being made. The problem is that the way it's been set up, we are not part of something being made. We're part of something that has been made. You know, and that's the problem. It's been done, and then we add to it as an afterthought, and that is a shame. Now, excuse me. Whether mainstream is the other question that we always get. Is it, if this is ever going to be mainstream? I have no idea. And you know what? For a while, over the past years, I was not obsessed, but I was thinking, because this is like a mission. I need to keep working on this. And I thought, okay, so let's, you know, make it mainstream. But you can't do that by yourself. And also, I'm not even sure that's the best use of the time and energy that we have. I mean, I work with Netflix a lot on this. We got them to invite us to their Hollywood offices. So we went there, we trained them, we gave them some update on their audio description training, and we talked to them about accessible filmmaking. You never know whether it's part of this or not, but I think this idea is something that they're happy with, and therefore they are now beginning to add elements like a creative dubbing supervisor. And this person is a link between the filmmakers and the studios. And if you look at the work specs, you know, specifications, the job specifications, sorry, you see that a lot of it is very accessible filmmaking. Like, whether it comes from the model or not, it doesn't really matter. We are not here to sell a model, but rather to push for a different way of doing things. But it's good to see that a lot of the elements are moving towards not having that divorce, not separation with the creators, linking it up, and so things are moving in that direction. But I don't think the fight should be to make it mainstream, because it may or may not happen, and it may not depend on us. I think the best use, I mean, I'm talking about myself here, yeah, but the best use of my time, I think it is to actually look out for those filmmakers who want to work in this way and see where we get. Because, you know, at the end of the day, those big corporations, you can't control, you know, the decisions are taken on the basis of so many things that escape you. Many of them to do with money. But when you actually look out for those, you know, you go out and look for those filmmakers, that's fantastic, because that's what leads us to the next step, which is you start working with them and they start coming up with ideas that you're thinking, I've been working on this for 10 years, never thought about that. Working with a filmmaker who said, we had a short film, and this was being done by a MA student, Josh Branson, fantastic PhD student, and he MA student at the time, and he was working with this filmmaker, and it was a short film where two people were talking, a man and a woman, kind of at the beginning not too close, but then as they waited for a train alone on the train station at the platform, they were kind of warming up to one another, and the subtitles were playing around with different positions and that kind of thing, and they talked about the color, and they used a color for each. And at some point, the filmmaker said, why don't we keep the colors, but as the film goes on, a little short film, we warm up the color a little bit, you know? And you're thinking, that's such a nice, subtle, maybe not noticeable, but in the end, in a way, I'm sure it will be noticed, kind of touch that we wouldn't come up with, you know? But a filmmaker, a visual person, someone who thinks that way, will take our accessibility, which is we have been taught it as kind of almost like a technique, and we'll turn it into an art, or we'll look for the art side of it. And this is when it gets really interesting. And that's what we're working on. It's not that we're working on creative media access because we just thought that it's interesting. It's because it's a natural progression of collaborating with artists. So then we start thinking, yeah, the guidelines are great, but they're a starting point, you know? What if you always get filmmakers who say, okay, thanks for the guidelines, but do we have to do this? As in, is it a law that compels us to do this? And I'm thinking, not always, no, you know, it's your film. Nobody's telling you how to make the film, right? I mean, sorry, there's loads of constraints, I know that, and very often they will tell you certain things that you have to do, but there are no books that tell you this is the only way of making films, you know, strict guidelines.
Yeah.
So although we do need guidelines, and I have worked hard on those guidelines, and they're very necessary, so please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we need to go against the guidelines. I think they're great, and over the past years a lot of the scientific and empirical work that we have done with eye tracking has helped us to have solid guidelines that are informed by the views of the users very often. So they're fantastic, and they're almost like democratized in that way. But there's also the other way. There's also, now that we have that, when we work with filmmakers, why not experiment with them? And that's when they get creative and they say, okay, displace this subtitle, you know, I don't know what the shot is at the moment, but if I'm like this, there's more space on one of the sides for me, right, of the frame. So should I have the subtitle going like this throughout, or should the subtitle be here on this side, bottom on the side in which to which I'm speaking? Because that way it's more natural, you know. I don't force the eye of the viewer to go across the whole of the bottom of the screen, but rather follow my look going down. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm seeing this very clearly in front of me, but maybe I'm making a mess, and you guys have a different view.
No, but
yeah.
No,
So
you're right. You're right.
We frame. I mean, the director of photography will frame in a way, and that frame, in a way, that framing is expecting the viewer to have a journey with their eyes. Now, when we add a subtitle, what do we do with that journey? What do we do? What do we create? Exactly. So can we play with that? Can we play with the possibility, with the graphic possibilities of the subtitles? You know. So I think it's worth.
I think that's the next step. I think it's really good. I saw the images you sent me about the eye tracking movement and eye movement tracking and how it changed from when you have normal subtitles, let's say, ordinary subtitles, and when the subtitles are placed at a different way of this, at a different place on the screen, and it's remarkable. I mean, you see the difference. I mean, you are watching the whole spectrum, not just
I mean, we've done a tracking research about it, and it's interesting because, yes, for sure, what we do is we minimize the time that you're spending away from the image, so you get more of the image. It is true that when you first see them, you're thinking, whoa, you know, that's quite out there, you know. I mean, it's quite I don't know, flashy, because it's not the usual thing, but people do get used to them. And also, you don't need to do it. What I mean is, there are all sorts of possibilities to play around with the subtitles, which could be the position, but it could also be the font, you know. So for example, we know that there's a lot of research on, I mean, just think about books, you know, who chooses the font and what does it mean, you know, for different books. So why do we need to only use 3 different fonts for subtitles? I know that legibility is an issue, but right now, nowadays, there's a lot of very legible fonts. And very interestingly, there's a lot of research on font psychology, which is what a font tells you other than the content. Yeah, there's a happy font, there's a sad font, there's a serious font, there's a, you know, and I don't mean super extreme, I mean little subtleties. We're talking thousands of fonts. So in a recent film, which we did like this, was called Ons, a Galician film, and one of my PhD students, Rocío Varela, who's very creative, she came on board as the creative subtitler, and what she did was she watched the film and she produced a portfolio of different options with the subtitles that could be presented to the filmmaker. And that was different fonts, different positions, different effects, different colors, different everything, and sent it to the filmmaker with a recommendation. a proposal. And then he chose to do this and that and that and that. And then he repeatedly emailed us saying, "Wow, this is fascinating. I never thought about this," And he wanted to go for the not flashy. I would say we have a spectrum between the conspicuous and inconspicuous, between attracting attention and not attracting it. And you choose along that spectrum. He wanted not to attract attention, but that doesn't mean that he wanted straight normal subtitles. You know why? Because he actually told me in a phone conversation, he said, "I actually think that normal subtitles are a little bit disruptive because, they do force you to go down there with the same font, very wide, blah, blah, blah." So he went for a creative approach to make them less visible or to make them in line with the aesthetics of the film, And they actually, it's great to see it because really the subtitles became one more tool at the disposal of the artist to convey his vision. Am I making sense? Yeah.
Wow.
So
yeah, and we have like 3 minutes only. I'm sorry because Instagram Live allows us. No, yeah, you're great because everybody's fascinated by what you're saying. I would be here speaking to you like for 4 more hours, but you will kill me, and we can't. So I hear it says, yeah, do you think it's more tiring for the eye to roam around the screen and find a subtitle?
That's a good question. What we do with that, because obviously that's an issue, what we do with that is when you create creative subtitles, you tend to have some criteria in mind. And one is, it is true that it may take a little bit longer to spot the subtitle, to find it straight away. Often you make up for that, but we're talking maybe half a second. We make up for that by the increased time that you have to look at the image because your eyes don't have to travel. So that's one element. And the other is, when you create those creative subtitles, it's very important that you don't think of, let's just change the position for the sake of it. No, you create a pattern as well across the film, and that pattern is something that is learned as well because a film, it takes some time to watch, and therefore you get used to that. So in a film called Notes on Blindness, we used slight displacement, and we eye tracked that, and the viewers took, I don't know how long it took, but 5, 10, 15 minutes to 10 minutes maybe till kind of touch.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah? Okay, I'm sorry. We have just 1 minute left, and I want to make sure that first I say thank you, because we are blown away by this, especially me, and your passion. I mean, it crosses the screen, as they say. It's incredible. So good luck with your research. We are eager to read this when it's out, of course.
Yeah.
And thank you so much on behalf of the ATA and of the audiovisual division for this interview because we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.